Welcome to the Mission Manhood podcast, where mature masculinity is celebrated and encouraged. My name is Angela Abide, and I will be your host. Every week or so, I sit down with a man who is in the men's movement, helping men grow and thrive in their masculinity, someone who is exhibiting characteristics of mature masculinity, or someone who has a perspective that might be beneficial for those who are seeking to grow and develop in that area. As a woman, I have a unique perspective as a mother and a therapist, and I hope to contribute to the conversation in those ways. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, I'm glad you're here. Today, my guest is Drew Birch. He is at Buster Rut Today on Instagram, and Drew helps men overcome various forms of addiction in his work. And I asked him specifically if he would come on the podcast to discuss the negative psychological, social, and physical consequences of porn addiction. And he was generous enough to share his own story and tell about how he overcame that in his own life. And I don't know if you were able to catch the last episode where it was Jonathan Corey was interviewing me for his live stream. At about minute 50, we started talking about pornography. And I said how in my observation, it seems to be parasitic and predatory and just so prevalent. And I don't even think we have begun to understand the consequences of such widespread and easily accessible access to porn, and especially how early kids are able to access pornography. So I hope you find the conversation interesting. It was a delight to speak with Drew. He's a very positive and compassionate person. And if you enjoy the episode or any episode, please share it. It really helps out a lot in terms of growing the podcast. Hello, Drew.
Hi there, Angela. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for joining me today.
It is such a pleasure to get to talk to you. You've interviewed a lot of interesting men in the past, and so I feel privileged to get to chat to you as well. Stoked to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And I love your accent, and you're coming to us from South Africa.
Yeah, on the garden route, on the southern coast of the country. Got good surf and good weather.
Wow. Well, tell me a little bit about what you're doing, what you're passionate about, how you're involved in men's work.
Angela, so I've essentially used my past journey, what's worked for me over a couple of years of trial and error, of failing and trying again, and essentially written it down and have started to reach out to men. It was a completely organic process. It's not something that I thought I was going to be doing. I had on my heart to work with men eventually, but the way that this came about wasn't something that I intentionally delved into. And so I've kind of just taken it as it comes and trying to help men by telling them what worked for me.
And so you work with men in overcoming porn addiction.
Amongst other things. So porn is I believe, one of the biggest issues in our society, one of the most damaging things in our society, and one of the things that is just not discussed enough. And so it's something that I decided to hit hard because I noticed night and day once I conquered it for myself. And it was a quick change as well. And that's what really encourages me to help guys, is that the turnaround is so quick once you flip that switch. But it's one of, amongst other things, any kind of apathy and addiction that holds you back from performing at an optimum level. And for me at a stage, it was fear. And I had addictions that were a symptom of that fear. And so we try and work out, what are you afraid of that causes you to resort to whatever your addiction or your response is to that. And so porn is one of the big ones. It's one of the biggest changes that we find in men when they can beat that one. It really is a big up, but amongst other things.
Yeah. One of the reasons, I reached out to you, I think I told you I was doing a concentration on sex. And I don't think we can really be honest today without having a conversation about porn and how it affects men sexually. And so I'm glad that you're here, because I know you've looked into this a lot. And plus you have the element of your own personal story.
Sure. Yeah. Let's get into that route then. I dealt with this from a young age. I remember being a little boy, and I think it's a trap that almost all men today have fallen into. We were very young. We were young enough we had an understanding of women. We had this energy between our legs. We didn't have a thought of having sex with a real life girl because we were so young, but we knew how Google worked, and so that's where we went. I can remember being about 10, seeing my first bit of action, and boom, it was like heroin, and this dopamine rush is so extreme, you're hooked almost instantly,
Hmm.
and so it becomes this repetitive action of you feel this urge, you don't know how to talk to girls yet. Maybe by the time you are ready to talk to real life girls, you're not too anxious to talk to real life girls, and you have this easy out. So
Hmm.
you get caught in what I've called the cuck cycle, and you end up cucking yourself instead of getting out there. And so it hit me young. I got hooked young, and I dealt with this story for about a decade and a half, maybe 12, 13 years, until I eventually felt enough consequence to my actions to decide I need to do something about this. And it's taken about 4 years. It's been about 4 years since I've used porn. And the difference in my life has been extreme. And it's something that I'm very excited about and passionate about. And that's why I want to tell other men about it, because it has made the biggest difference to my life.
I feel like I have a lot of compassion for you. I don't think you're that much younger or older. I'm not sure how old you are than my oldest son, and I have three sons. And I really distinctly remember understanding that it was out of my hands, that I could not protect my son. And that was such a terrible feeling. And I feel like it's kind of unique to your generation because you have these people who don't understand the technology that's growing at lightning speed around them, and they don't know how to protect their kids. And then the kids are actually smarter about the technology than the parents.
Yeah.
It was almost like I looked at it like we're in the Garden of Eden. And as a mother, I felt like, it's my job to keep them
Mm.
protected and kind of innocent for as long as I could, understanding that eventually they're going to meet people, they're going to see things. But it seemed to be very invasive in a quicker way.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of guys that are in their 20s and 30s now really suffer the consequences of the adults that didn't know how to protect them in a way.
Sure. I don't think that our parents, that my parents, were ready for how accessible and, like you say, invasive porn would be. They really did a good job of getting it into everybody. I
Hmm.
mean, I've never met a man who hasn't seen porn, who's been able to say to me he's never watched porn before.
Right.
And so, yeah, it is incredibly invasive from a very young age. And like any other addict, once you're hooked, you find a way. And
Yeah.
as a parent, there are no barriers that you can put in place to try and stop your child from getting their hit once they're hooked. Unfortunately, I think it needs to come from a place of very early on explaining exactly what's going to happen, actually looking under the hood of that addiction itself, explaining what the consequences are going to be. And the other side of that coin is that if somebody isn't ready to hear what you have to tell them, it doesn't, you can bash their head against the wall, they're not going to hear it. You need to be open and receptive to hearing what that person has to tell you. And so that's the other side of this journey, is I can shout at the top of my lungs, guys, get off porn, but unless you're ready for it, it doesn't matter. And I think the hope just has to be that your children are open and receptive to hearing what you have to say as a parent, because I wasn't.
Yeah. Or that they run across people like you who are saying, hey, I'm in the same boat. Look what I did. And
Yeah,
I'm curious, like you said, you have to be ready. And like with most addictions, you kind of hit the bottom of the barrel, so to speak. And
yeah.
what was it for you? How did you know that you really needed help?
I was raised in a Christian home. And so as a young boy, I felt this immense sense of guilt. And I wasn't the worst guy in my high school, boarding school dorm. There were guys with terabytes of porn. And because I didn't have that much saved on my laptop, I didn't think I was that bad. But it was
Mhm.
still a daily thing for me eventually. And for years, it was a consistent thing. Until eventually, I can remember one night at varsity, I brought this young woman home, a literal supermodel, beautiful brunette, long legs. There was nothing more that she could have done, that she could have been, and I just couldn't get it up. I had porn-induced erectile dysfunction, essentially, and a very embarrassing moment, obviously. And I knew that it was because of what my expectations were, and there was nothing that she could have done in that moment.
Yeah.
And that just hit me, because where do you go from there? Unfortunately, I think that most guys from that point just retreat back into the internet and just avoid real life relationships completely, because then you don't have that fear of it happening again. You never have that fear of shame. You still want your hit. And so then you're a complete incel. You cut
Mhm.
yourself completely. And I think that the danger is, the thing that I'm afraid of is what percentage of men might secretly be there already. In 2010, Japan had a study, and it was that 36% of men were not interested in sex. 2010. It had doubled from the same research they did in 2008. So 12 years later, I'll leave it to your imagination to guess what that number must be right now. Dr. Molly Maloof thinks that amongst the American population that it is 30% today of American Gen Z boys. So I think a whole generation is just stepping away from real life intimacy completely while taking in porn. And
Mhm.
there are a couple of reasons for that. But what definitely isn't up for debate, although it's hard to believe, is that my generation and the generation after me is having the least sex in the last 100 years. Nobody is getting real life action or the real life intimacy that comes with that real life action.
Mhm.
And it is scary to see it. It is a big worry.
You had something on your Instagram that talked about a man today can see more bodies in 30 seconds than his grandfather did in his entire life. And yet
Yeah.
he's getting less actual sex than grandpa did.
Yeah. And I actually had a couple of guys that said that can't be true, but it is. And there are a couple of reasons why it's happened. And once you understand why it's happened, it kind of makes sense. First off, back in the day, you didn't have a TV. You got bored a lot sooner,
Hmm.
right? You also didn't have the distractions in all the other aspects that we have today. I'm talking career, I'm talking social media, I'm talking video games, I'm talking recreational drug use, smoking,
Hmm.
all the rest of it that would just take time away from when you would be chasing action, right? You've cucked yourself to another man doing it. You've compared yourself to this guy. So now you have a sense of shame. Am I perhaps inadequate? And
Hmm.
you're also uninterested, because all the filters that we're seeing on our social media, we see a woman that you would normally rate as maybe a 6 out of 10. Suddenly she's an 11 out of 10. And now the ones you're seeing in real life just aren't that interesting.
Hmm.
How could they ever be? And so you feel inadequate. She doesn't look as appealing as she should. You've cucked yourself to some other guy, so you're used to being an observer, not used to being the one in the driver's seat anyway. And so why wouldn't you just sit back and do yourself and carry on that way, right? It's easier. There's no pressure. There's no responsibility. You don't have to put any work. There's no fear of rejection. There's no delayed gratification. And our generation loves taking the path of least resistance. And so we continue to go down that route, unfortunately.
I think women are less susceptible to get wrapped up in it. I know a lot of women are and have been, but for me, an analogy is food, because you can't really live without food. So you can't quit food cold turkey. But the terrible kind of food is everywhere. Like when you go in the supermarket, there's
Sure,
rows and rows and rows of
sure.
additives and dyes. And
100%.
so you're surrounded by these temptations at all times. And it
Mm-hmm.
takes like a
Mm-hmm.
Herculean effort
Yeah.
to break like a food addiction, because you're surrounded by the bad stuff. And
And
I
you
know
do have
from,
to eat.
yeah, and you
And so
do have
you
to eat.
justify it.
Yeah,
Sure.
and like to be a healthy adult, you're having sex, or if you're in a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
you should
Yeah.
be as part of a healthy relationship. And
100%.
it's really difficult. I think also on your Instagram, I saw that you're constantly surrounded. So even if you decide, hey, I'm not going to use porn anymore, every time you open social media, there's some girl there, even I've seen the craziest stuff, somebody in lingerie quoting scripture. And I'm like, do you not understand how the male brain works? And I'm like, yeah, she really does. She understands how it works
Yeah,
because she wants
100%.
the clicks and likes.
She's
And
chasing that same energy. Yeah,
guys are having to deal with this constantly.
yeah,
And so even if you're really trying hard, you're still going to be, the
yeah.
siren song of all these lovely ladies is
Absolutely bombarded.
everywhere. Yeah.
Sure, 100%.
How do you kind of work your way around that?
I think understanding exactly what's happening on a physiological level, on a chemical level, on a behavioral level, kind of looking under the hood of the addiction, understanding that, understanding what the withdrawals and the body's response is going to look like initially, and then putting in some framework
Hmm.
as to what you do when you're feeling this, you do this, talk to this guy, if that makes sense, put in frameworks, understand what's happening. I think that goes a long way, but it is tough. And it's very tough initially. It gets easier. And it gets easier when you understand that you can. I think that's a big part of breaking most addictions is that once you understand that you really can, it's half the battle. But guys try so often and then give up so often that that failure becomes a part of their identity and they really, really struggle eventually to kick it. Half the battle is motivating people to try. Guys are afraid to even try. They'd rather just accept the failure than try and quit because they think it's going to be so hard because you've been caught for so many years.
That kind of goes back to the food thing too. I know what I need to do to be healthy. It
Yeah,
takes so much more effort to do the meal planning and to go buy the proper foods and then come home and prepare them than it does
yeah,
to just rip open a package. It's so much easier to
sure,
do that.
sure, sure.
But I think for me, starting to look at that as poison, like when I walk into a grocery store, I think of all of that as poison. And I
Hmm.
don't want that to do that to my body.
So the problem with porn is that it hits you as hard, if not harder, than most other hard drugs because
Hmm.
you don't see an immediate consequence. Initially, you don't think that you're seeing immediate consequence. Whereas, the meth addict might see some serious physical changes within a couple of months.
Yeah.
The porn addict doesn't notice them for maybe years. It took me more than a decade to really notice what was happening. I can't imagine the man that I would have been if I had gone through puberty without the implications and consequences of having watched porn before. I would have been a completely different animal. I would have been
Hmm.
confident, I would have been focused. I thought I had ADHD. Turns out your focus gets wrecked.
Hmm.
The gray matter, your frontal lobes actually shrink by watching pornography on a consistent basis. And your frontal lobes are associated with self-control, with being able to say no to yourself and stop yourself from doing things that have negative consequence. How much of our self-discipline, how much of our lack of performance is because we're handicapped? And guys don't know the difference because they've always been watching porn. You haven't
Right.
had a season of your life where you haven't, so that is just your standard. And I think I would have been a completely different person had I not been hooked on this horrible, horrible drug.
It's interesting to see it that way. Like you're saying, young adult men today have likely been addicted to this drug since they were boys.
Yeah,
A high percentage, unless they were under a rock somewhere, because, like you said, it's so easily accessible and easy to get.
you find porn before you find real sex with a real girl, and then it
Yeah.
catches you and it keeps you there. And it's a
Yeah.
dangerous because it's a twofold effect. On the one hand, you've got the dopamine, and dopamine we know is released by the brain when you're about to do something that your body would normally do to survive. I
Hmm.
am about to eat, I'm about to have sex, I'm about to work out. It can be any kind of, it's a positive reinforcement for a decision. So it's the craving chemical. It's the I have to do this now. So you're thinking about porn and you're already getting the hit. And your brain starts to tingle. Okay, so now
Hmm.
you're revved up. You cut yourself, and then you have this release of opiates. And that's your reward for a good job. The problem is you get a massive release of opiates from social interactions because that's a big part of our survival, social interaction. The most important, the highest ranked social interaction, of course, is sex. And so you've just had sex. So your brain releases this massive rush of opiates. Well done, boy. You just did good, except you've tricked your brain. You never had sex. You never had intimate connection with the real person. You've just flooded your brain and you do it every day, right? And so your opiate receptors get fried. Your minimum threshold of opiates that you need, and opiates are a big part of regulating your social anxiety. You fried your receptors. You need a higher level of opiates now to maintain a base minimum anti-anxiety. You're not getting that out of your standard social interaction. So when you're in a group, when you shake another man's hand, you feel timid, you feel anxious. The social interaction stresses you out. And so
Yeah.
we see a massive drop in confidence. And we can tell you why. And once you understand why, you're like, oh, flip, and then you can say, I can start to see these consequences right now. I may not have noticed them or been able to identify them because I had always had them. I had thought that that was my normal. I had thought that I was just not a confident kid. Turns out I was cucking myself. Dopamine's just as bad. It's, if you think about your brain as this grassy meadow, you walk the route, you go to the computer, you watch some porn, you jerk off, and you do it again tomorrow. When you've walked that route enough times, those synapses fire, that becomes the neural link. And that becomes your
Mhm.
go-to, your standard. And so you don't have to think about watching porn. It's your body's natural reaction, especially when you get something that triggers it. And it can be anything from a picture on a billboard, the softcore
Mhm.
scene in your movies, the little girls in their TikTok skirts on your TikTok. They're all chasing the same energy and they're still triggering you in the same way. So it comes out of nowhere. It fires that neural pathway, and suddenly you're back without thinking to your standard operating procedures because that dopamine starts firing again. You get an over release of dopamine. It fries your
Mhm.
dopamine receptors, and yeah, your dopamine is responsible for motivation. It's responsible for fulfillment from your daily tasks, and so you real life fulfillment and happiness doesn't meet the basic minimum threshold that your receptors need to feel that happiness. And so porn literally drains the color from your life. It literally drains the happiness from your life. It then makes you mentally weak, adjusts what you think is normal, takes away the desire for you to have real sex. And one of the biggest issues that we see, that I saw, and I think explains
Mhm.
my ED that I had that night, is that in studies, porn addicts have arousal when they find something novel, when they find
Mhm.
something new and different and maybe more extreme. And the internet does that for you. You'll find guys will have a whole bunch of tabs open because they want to have new experiences, new experiences, new experiences. Try and bring them into real life. And how are you going to have a long term relationship with one woman? Be faithful and not get bored. You want to know what some of your relationships aren't working out.
Mhm.
You're going to get bored naturally, right? And so you go and look for something different, maybe something a little bit more hardcore, and then you get this massive dopamine spike again, and it fries your receptors, and then you don't get aroused by the same stuff anymore. And you have to look at something different and something more hardcore, um, and you find something more hardcore, and it violates your expectations, but that in itself revs you, and so you look for something more edgy, and then you try and bring that edginess into your real life relationships, and that catches you too, because what was wholesome and beautiful now gets wrecked because you're not getting aroused by what you should have been getting aroused by.
Yeah. I think that kind of goes back to grandpa in a way. And especially even a generation or two before that, when even the lights went out, when the sun went down. I mean, those people were probably having more true intimacy. It's just a moment to be together, to connect. It didn't really matter what outfit you had on. We worked around it. The legs probably weren't shaved perfectly. You're dealing with like a real person who maybe hadn't even bathed in a week. And I think one of the problems with porn also is the performative element and how difficult it is to keep up with that. And one thing that I'm seeing from women is just this sort of exhaustion, like, oh, we have to have sex again. It's not like, it's like I have to get the right outfit. I have to be waxed properly.
Mm,
It's not just this moment to
mm,
come together in
mm.
love and intimacy. It's
Yeah,
more of a let's go on stage now and do the
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
So,
100%, 100%. And then once you do perform and you've done all the things that you have to do, you're waxed up and lingerieed up and all of it, that doesn't keep them around much longer either because it still becomes the same thing. It's called the Coolidge effect. And that refers to the fact that your brain releases less dopamine for the same experience. So there's actual chemistry behind what's happening. And in the past, we would probably just move past that. And that's why you'd probably spice things up in the bedroom 10 years in, you know? Now, I don't know, guys are moving on. They want these massive drastic changes or crazy spiced up, edgy sex. The other side of it is the one thing that does give me hope is that neuroplasticity allows for us to recover. And there is hope for men. As bad as I've made it sound over the last 10 minutes, there really is a chance. I've seen it in myself. I mean, my libido is through the roof naturally for the woman that I am bound to, who I adore in a completely wholesome relationship. And so I know that there is a hope for all men to be able to recover, and that nobody's really too far gone.
Yeah. There are a lot of cynical younger guy groups.
Yeah, looking at porn though, and the recovery process, and what guys find so quickly is that as soon as you give your brain a chance to recover, the receptors for both dopamine and opiates, they're not as numb as they used to be. And
Mm-hmm.
so you stop being as anxious as you used to be. Your receptors have a lowered minimum threshold again. And so your anxiety decreases very quickly while your confidence skyrockets. And your confidence skyrockets for two reasons. The first being that you now have these chemicals again that your brain can receive properly. And so it lowers your social anxiety from a chemical point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But also you have kept your word to yourself. You told yourself you were going to stop watching porn, and then you did. For
Mm-hmm.
2 whole weeks, you managed to do it. And when you start keeping your promise to yourself, you start to back yourself, and that's another reason that this confidence spikes, and that makes a difference to you. And then you
Mm-hmm.
feel this energy between your legs that you contain, that you retain, and that you can redirect. There's actually scientific evidence to suggest that your pheromones are changed
Wow.
when you retain that energy. And there are a whole bunch of guys that have spoken out on it over the years. I don't know if you know the author of Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill,
Yeah.
but he speaks about it, retaining that seed and redirecting the energy. Gandhi talks about it. Steve Jobs was a proponent of it as well. Kanye West, Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, all of these guys, when they were trying to perform and live life at a high level, wouldn't have sex. Not just they wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
watch porn or masturbate, they wouldn't ejaculate, and they would retain that energy and redirect it into
Mm-hmm.
their life's mission. There's definitely a trend online
Yeah.
of men being wholesome. First off, getting off of porn, having wholesome relationships, and the next part is then retaining that energy and redirecting it towards their life's causes. So I think that's been pretty cool to see. I've definitely noticed a difference on that. Not just not watching porn, but not spilling your seed haphazardly with no positive reason for that, if that makes sense. Just being a
Yeah.
release.
No. Yeah.
That's been pretty cool, and something that I've definitely found trending and building online that guys seem to be getting on, which is cool. It's good to see that trend growing.
Anybody who's willing to be open to the research can see for themselves. I think most people understand it's not the healthiest thing now, where I don't think that was the
Yeah.
case,
Yes.
maybe a few
Yes.
years ago. So
Society
that,
almost promoted it for a while. It was almost the healthy thing to do. If you
yeah,
didn't
yeah,
jerk off twice a week, your doctor said you might get testicular cancer. Kind of not. Don't quote me on that. It's obviously
yeah.
not accurate, but that's the kind of perception that we seem to have. Was that it was this fine, okay thing, and it was not. It was like the equivalent of shooting up, but it was just one more thing that doctors told us it was okay for us, and it's turned out to do so much damage. On that note, though, when guys stop, there's some things that they immediately start to get right. They become more focused. They've got all this energy now, right? Because they're not just jerking off every night, and that energy they then get to redirect towards whatever they're doing. They've got a bit of spring in their step. They've got this confidence. They've lowered their anxiety, and they're backing themselves more. Their whole self image is improved, and it takes about 8 days. I normally ask a guy for 8 days. If a guy says to
Hmm.
me like, "Oh, I can't do this," I say just 8 days. 8 days, your testosterone is going to be through the roof, and for a man, that's big. To have a high testosterone it does a whole bunch of things
Hmm.
other than just build muscle. It's great for energy. It's great for your focus. And so luckily the turnaround is quick. If you can just hold out for a couple of days and get through that initial withdrawal symptom, because like any drug, there are withdrawals. If you can
Mhm.
just push through that initial period, the benefits are quick and they're very easy to see. And so there is that encouragement to the story.
One thing I really love about what I see of your work is you're super compassionate and you're not just getting on there preaching the evils of porn. It's like this is ruining your life and I'm going to show you some ways that you can turn this around and there's a lot of hope. On your Instagram there's a start here button and you give people very distinct steps. Like nobody's coming. Taking the easy route leads the wrong direction, just one day at a time. And one thing that I love that you said is slip, don't slide. Like you're
Yeah,
going to slip up sometimes and just let it be
yeah.
that. Don't slide all the way back down to the bottom.
That was a big one for me. I was at university, had just started getting my life together, stopped smoking cigarettes. I used to be a pack a day smoker, stopped smoking weed
Wow.
for a bit. I used to be an everyday wake and bake, stopped watching porn, stopped womanizing, stopped playing PlayStation the whole day, stopped eating junk food. And I went for a hike with my best friend. We took some magic mushrooms. We went to the nature reserve, and magic mushrooms weren't on the naughty list. That was okay because it's a once a year thing for me, and I think
Okay.
they're great. But I wasn't supposed to smoke weed, and I did. And by the end of the night, I had had half a bottle of tequila, a couple more joints, a pack of cigarettes. We found some ketamine somewhere in this night of partying, and I'd gone back to my ex. And you
Oh,
can't
wow.
imagine the remorse the next day of having to deal with that. And I realized that if I had just been able to control my mind after I had smoked that joint and been like, wow, Drew, you really messed up. Grab a hold of yourself, man. I would have been able to at least be proud of myself the next day for having not stepped out completely. But I
Mhm.
have this all or nothing mentality, and a lot of guys do. Oh, I've messed up today. I'll start again tomorrow. Or oh, I'll try again next week. Or I'll try again next year. It needs to be a case of when I mess up, recollecting and pulling yourself together is the next goal. You're not going to be able to
Mhm.
be proud of yourself that you maintained, but you can at least be proud of yourself for pulling it together that quickly because you understand that most of the time you would have sent it completely, right? And so that was a big one to understand. But all of those, nobody's coming. Also, a massive one. Nobody's coming to tell you to stop watching porn. No one's going to come
Mhm.
and take your cell phone away. It's up to you. Those are just underlying mind shift principles that if someone doesn't grasp those things, nothing else that you recommend to them is going to work for them because if they
Mhm.
don't get that it's up to them, you can't beat that into somebody.
Yeah. And that importance of keeping your promises to yourself. And at the end of the day, that power of being able to look at yourself in the mirror and think, okay, I did it. That's so
Yeah,
empowering.
yeah. Can't
Um,
fool them out in the mirror. You
yeah.
can fool everybody else, but when you look in the mirror, you know what you've done. It's important to keep your promises to yourself, and when you do, it starts getting easier to do. I'm a massive believer. One of the next steps in Buster Out, it's uncuck yourself, stop watching porn. The next one is wake up early because it sucks. Because you have to make
Hmm.
a promise to yourself, then you have to keep it. Once you've done that, you've got momentum for the day. You make your
Yeah.
bed, you wake up early, you've suddenly got 2 wins already. And so keeping your promise to yourself is a big one from a psychological, just backing yourself, just your confidence booster. It's those small things that really do add up.
That leads me into this thing that you do that I think is super important and such a great idea. You talk about your hardware, your software. Tell people what you mean by your hardware.
So that's that's the next one in the Buster a Rut program, and I think it's important to realize why I do the Buster Rut program. It's because your life's in shambles in one way or another. You're hooked on porn, you're hooked on PlayStation, you're afraid of failure, you're addicted to weed or cigarettes or alcohol or womanizing, and now you're trying to kick one of these addictions and level up to living life at full capacity. The best way to beat addiction is to leave it somewhere. I traveled Africa with our friends. There were 24 of us on an overlander bus for 63 days, and we smoked a box of cigarettes every single day. And then when we flew out of Malawi, when I flew out of Malawi, the other guys actually stayed on the bus for a little longer. I had my last cigarette in Malawi, and I left it in Malawi. Then I flew home, and I had left it somewhere. We can't all leave the country to stop an
Yeah.
addiction, but what you can do is leave the person you were behind and shock the system to such a degree that your old habits aren't attached to you anymore. I am no longer that person. I used to smoke. I am no longer the Drew that used to smoke. I've left that and a whole bunch of other habits behind. And
Yeah.
so what the Bus Right program does, it's a complete overhaul of who you were. About 90 days. You see what
Mhm.
sticks, and not everything sticks. You start messing up in some areas, and then you bring in some more things. But the
Yeah.
idea is that you change who you are enough to completely have an identity shift and be a completely different person. And your old habits and old addictions don't have any space to hold on to because it's not the same you anymore. You've
Mhm.
completely stripped that shirt. It's
Yeah.
uncuck yourself. Big one. It's going to make a big psychological difference. Wake up early. We wake up early because you get time to have your program in place. And I do a couple of things. I wake up, I stretch. I do 100 push-ups normally. I've broken my hand, so I'm not doing push-ups at the moment. I'm doing squats at the moment, but I do some stretching and some push-ups normally, and then I have some time for reading. I read a chapter of Proverbs every day because I think there's a good impartation of wisdom there. I don't think
Mhm.
that it's purely religious. I think that from a practical sense, it's really good for getting your mindset right. And then I read Ryan Holiday's work, Everyday Stoic, I think it is,
Mhm.
and then I get some mental input there, and then I practice gratitude and I practice positive affirmations. Something else that Napoleon Hill talks about quite a lot, and that as Christians we believe if you believe in something and you declare something that it's going to happen, it's an act of faith, right? But Napoleon Hill seems to believe the same thing. And then you upgrade your hardware, and that is to make hard physical effort towards something every day. You pick a goal. For me, the 1 year, it was I wanted to run 10 kilometers every day for a month. And I had
Wow.
run 7 kilometers from the 1st of January until the 1st of June. And then from the 1st of June to the end of the month, I ran 10 kilometers a day. And it was the fact that it was hard, that I made a promise to myself that I would do something, and then I did it, that mattered. No matter what time of the day it is that I got home, I ran. Another year, I did the Goggins 4x4x48. It can be whatever the challenge is. It's just that it needs to be something difficult. You need to work towards it. You need to then conquer it. And it's not to show anybody else. It's to show yourself. It's a show of strength to yourself. You make a promise to yourself to do something hard, and then you do it. And that builds character. Goggins talks about it, David Goggins, in his book Can't Hurt Me. A cookie in the cookie jar. When you go through something else that is hard in life, you get to look back and say, I did that hard thing, I can do this hard thing. So that's big for your psychology. Upgrading your software, you become like who you spend time with. And I can't spend time with David Goggins or Marcus Aurelius. But I can read their book and I can grab onto their worldview, process it, and adopt it as my own. And so I recommend when I'm saying upgrade your software, I'm saying read books,
Yeah.
podcast, talk to the right people. And then I have got a whole section that is talking about meditation. And by meditation, I mean practicing gratitude, being happy for what you do have in life, because practicing
Mhm.
gratitude changes your brain chemistry. And not just being grateful for things, but also declaring who you are, who you would be, and what you would have, and what you're going to do to get there. Because it's important to visualize where you're going in life. When you don't have vision, you fall for comfort. So that's massive too, is that you can sit there at the beginning of your day. That's why we wake up early. We get time to be able to sit there and say, who am I? What am I doing? Why does it matter? And the last part of that program is fuel. Because, and it's not just what you eat, although it is massive, but it's what do you watch? What do you listen to? What are you reading? A lot of guys, like I did, I would get clam baked and I would buy the biggest bag of flings, corn chips, the biggest slab of chocolate, a massive chocolate milkshake,
Yeah.
and I'd play video games the whole day. And now I'm not pure carnivore, but I try and stick to that carnivore, an intermittent carnivore, when I'm on a maintenance diet at least. Your fuel, your food impacts on your mood. So if you're not happy with where you are in life, if you're a moody, grumpy person, if you're depressed, try changing your diet. Change your inputs and it will change your outputs. And so fuel
Yeah.
is just another area that you can discipline yourself in, whether it's going carnivore or going intermittent or whatever it is. I'm not a dietitian, and so I'm not trying to push too hard on that. Your food makes a difference to your performance. This is what these guys are saying. If you're trying to practice discipline, this might be a good area to do it. And not everything sticks. If the guys get 5 out of 6 of the prerequisites right, then nice, my dude,
Yeah.
that's cool. And so that's the program. That's what we're trying to build towards. The biggest focus that I'm talking about at the moment is uncucking yourself from porn, though, because that
Mhm.
is the biggest turnaround. And then we get to talk about the rest.
It kind of makes sense, though, that the two go hand in hand because I think one of the problems of our age is we have this need, we feel like, to be constantly entertained and swiping and looking for the next thing that is thrilling, or we're just bored. And what you're saying is you have all of these things that you do in place of, instead of, and then those things make you feel self-confident and stronger and better about yourself. So it's not
Yeah.
just taking something away, it's also adding to.
One of the things that I tell the guys that I'm speaking into, that I'm mentoring in this porn recovery program, is don't just try and fight the impulse and the drive there. And some of the guys are married. I say to them, redirect it to something wholesome. Your wife's taken a bit of a knock. You just had to tell her that you've been watching porn for the last decade, and suddenly she doesn't feel that loved. She doesn't feel pretty enough. And a woman wants to feel loved. She wants to feel beautiful. She wants to feel wanted. And so I say redirect that energy towards something wholesome. Flirt with your wife. Tell her how beautiful she is. Send her a dirty text. Have the energy and then redirect it to her. Don't try and tell yourself that you're not feeling aroused. Shift your focus and where you're sending that energy. It's really, really tough to be aroused and then to tell yourself to not be aroused. And if you don't have a long-term partner, then that's tough, my guy. Then that's what you're going to have to do. Break the momentum, and you can. And you can. Guys feel aroused and don't give in to that temptation all the time. Initially, it's really hard. You're like, oh, I can't go anymore. I'm going to have to release. It's been like 24 hours since the last time you released. Cold showers. 300 push-ups, a 10-kilometer run. You do whatever it takes initially to break the momentum, but it is possible. It is possible to completely clean cut that arousal. If you don't have to, then redirect it towards something wholesome. Redirect your energy for something good, something that's worthwhile.
Yeah. And that starts to build. And then you realize over time that you've built something really wholesome that you can be proud
Yeah.
of. I love that message. It's very hopeful. I wanted to read what you wrote on Instagram. You said, "You got caught in the cuck cycle while too young to know better. Too young to get real action, but old enough to know how Google works. You can't change that now, but you can decide today that enough is enough. You can break the cycle and level up to life at full potential. Or you can stay down, a mere shadow of the man you were meant to be. The choice is yours."
Yeah.
I really like that. And that kind of encapsulates what I believe is your compassion toward men. You're not just yelling at them to do better like a drill sergeant. You're saying, hey, you fell into this trap. You were probably seduced into this trap. It's not your fault, but you're responsible, and I can help you get to the other side.
So, you're too young to even understand the consequences. But I want to still say that it is your fault. You have to take responsibility. It has to be you. You can never say, it wasn't my fault and now I'm stuck with it and I can't do anything about it. Everything has to be on you. Nobody's going to come take it for you, if that makes sense. But you're right. It hits you early. It hit me early. And obviously there's an aspect of shame that I feel myself in talking about this. Nobody wants to talk about their own addiction, right? Their own struggles. And I've had to decide to put my ego aside because I think that there are enough men that I know personally that would benefit from the knowledge that I have to share. And so I will wear that shame, which I don't feel anymore because it's been stripped from me and that has been dealt with and I am washed clean. So that's not something that I deal with. Me telling you how it's impacted me, that I have been as hit by this as you have been, that you're not alone, and that I have conquered it, and so therefore you can too. So it's a message of I've been there too, still being a little bit hard because it is still your fault. Take responsibility for what you're doing daily. You may not have understood the consequences initially, but you still clicked the buttons. And then this is what worked for me. I've been there. Let me help you up too. And the steps are simple. Stop watching porn. Be angry enough with yourself. Hate where you are enough to decide that you're willing to do the hard thing to not be where you are again. Like when you feel angry enough with yourself, eventually it'll stop. And then deal with the emotions that are triggering it, because we often find that addiction, whether it's, I was afraid of failing auditing. I studied an accounting degree at college at varsity. And so I would wake up and smoke a joint every morning instead and get clam baked and play video games because I was afraid of the auditing test that I was going to fail.
Yeah.
And so I was just afraid to look at life. When I was a young boy, I was in boarding school from a very young age. I used to read books. I used to read almost a book a day because I just hated reality. That was my escape from reality. And so
Mhm.
porn becomes an escape. It's this relax, relief, the surest way to get a good night's sleep at the end of another shitty day. And it's your continual escape. So if you don't deal with the actual issues, the emotions that you're feeling, whether it's rejection, whether it's shame, whether it's depression, whether it's fear, you're going to struggle to deal with the real issue, right? You can't put a band aid over the problem. Deal with the actual issue. And then you are primed all the time by society at every turn, whether you're watching a movie or scrolling TikTok. So then don't scroll TikTok. Throw your phone out the window if you have to. Delete Instagram. Unfollow every single girl in a bikini on your Instagram. Why have you got girls in bikinis on your Instagram? What is it doing for you? You're giving her some like. She doesn't even know who you are. You're letting her wind you up. You know you have this problem, and you're going straight back to the dealer saying, "Can I have some more, sir?" Unfollow
Mhm.
everybody on your Instagram. Get rid of the stimulus, right? And as soon as you do that, it makes it a little bit easier. When you start to get aroused, do something about it. Don't let it build. You get your dopamine release by just thinking about the fact that you might watch porn later. So cut it off. Have a cold shower. I know cold showers suck, but we hate porn more. Do push-ups until you're dead. Until you would never think about jerking off anymore because your arms don't work. Don't just do 100. Do them for the next hour.
Right.
Get serious enough about it to do whatever it takes to not fall into that trap again. Be that convinced and that serious about it. And
Yeah.
then the other thing is that you haven't been able to stop before. You've been hooked for a decade. And you think, I might be able to stop for today and I might be able to stop for tomorrow. But the next day and the day after that and the day after that, I could never. I'm not strong enough. Ed Milet had a reel, I think yesterday, the day before, that was great. His father said to him as well, it's one day at a time. His father was an alcoholic. He got clean and he said, Dad, are you going to start drinking again? He says, I don't know. I might, but not today.
Mm.
I'm just not going to do it today. And that's all it is you take one day at a time. You just tackle today and you say, just today I'm not going to. I'm just going to beat it for one more day. And then you do it again tomorrow.
Yeah.
And when you start to take that approach, it gets a little bit easier. If you're looking at the big picture, it's going to scare you. If we take it one day at a time, we actually can deal with it. We're just breaking it up into smaller bits. Then find somebody that you can talk to that can hold you accountable. I have a guy, I message him twice a day right now. He's about to do 30 days. But have someone that you can talk to, that you can say, I'm struggling today. Like, snap me
Mhm.
out of this. Talk to me. It's someone that's saying, I'm thinking about you, brother. I've been where you have been. I know how you're feeling. Just get through this another week. Get through today. This is what you can do. I'm backing you. I believe in you. And that accountability, whether it's a person or a group, as long as it's someone that you trust and someone that has been here and is doing what you're trying to do, right? Because if he's still watching porn, he's not going to be saying to you, you can do this, brother. And then, like you said earlier, if you slip, don't slide.
Mhm.
Get up quickly. If you mess up, don't now start again for another month and tell yourself you'll try again in another month's time. Go again.
Yeah.
Go again. Get up again. Go again. Slip, don't slide. And then, as I also mentioned earlier, that's why the rest of Basurat works so nicely on this. It changes your identity as a whole. Change who you are. I am no longer the porn addict, Drew. I'm not. I'm a beast. I run miles. I choke people out. I surf. I wake up every morning at 5. I am a completely different man to the man that I was when I was hooked on porn.
Yeah.
We're not like you wouldn't recognize the two of us standing next to each other. And so when you change everything about yourself, those addictions fall away. Because old Drew was addicted to those things, not me. I haven't smoked a joint in like 2 years now. We're a completely different box of frogs. It's not the same thing. And I think when you have the battle plan ahead of, like, in front of you, you know, this is how I'm going to feel. This is what I have to do. It makes it easier.
Yeah. I think having somebody that understands your vision or where you're trying to go, and that in
Yeah,
the heat of it, they can remind you of what you said you wanted. That's so
sure,
powerful.
sure.
So,
And one of the first questions I always ask is, what is this costing you? Why do you want to stop porn? Can be the same question for any other addiction, but why do you want to stop this? What is it costing you? What is it going to cost you in the future if you don't get this right? Why is this such a big deal? Write it down. Tell yourself, no sugarcoating, exactly what it's going to cost you. Your marriage, your work, your performance through life as a whole. And when you put that in black and white, that helps as well.
And I think, as you've so wonderfully pointed out, it's your self love. It's you giving away all of your power. I mean, that's the ultimate cost that you're paying, is you're
Yeah,
selling out to these momentary pleasures and this addiction, and you're never able to get back to being true to yourself.
yeah.
Just what I'm observing from you, it's this vitality that even over the screen is evident that you've reclaimed for yourself by giving up these addictions.
The difference is so night and day. People don't necessarily know what's different about you, but they can tell within a week, within 2 weeks, there's a spring in your step. You are cocked and fully loaded. You are,
Yeah.
and your pheromones change. Heads turn. You get more confident. You get more focused. You suddenly start performing at a higher level. There's more fulfillment from your everyday activities. There's color in your day again, and it's an easy sell.
Yeah.
I need a guy to go 8 days. If he can go 8 days, even if he slips again after 8 days, he's going to get back on it. He's going to get back on it. He's going to have that release and he's going to be like, oh no. Oh. And you can feel the energy drain from you again. It feels like your tank just got tapped, right? You're running on empty all day and suddenly you're running on full. And so if a guy can go 8 days, guys slip up all the time. Don't get me wrong. This temptation is bombarding you. I don't claim final victory in this fight. I never have. It's a continuous battle. I haven't watched porn in 4 years, but I've messed up in other ways. But as soon as you start getting the upper hand and you start to feel what it feels like to be free of the chains and performing at a high level, your default becomes semen retention, not watching porn, rather than your daily activity. That's the big difference that I find.
Well, I appreciate so much you joining, just being so authentic and open and real, sharing your story. I think it really is valuable for people who are looking for a way to change. So thank
Angela,
you for
thank
that.
you so much for giving me a platform to talk. I do appreciate it. It has been
Yeah.
fantastic to talk to you. It's something that I could spend hours talking about. I really do appreciate your
Yeah.
time, and that we
Yeah.
finally got a chance to chat. And I hope that we will chat again sometime in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's a very valuable resource for people to have more information and to understand why. And just like we're talking about counting the cost and what it's taking from you. So, could you let people know how they can get in touch with you or find you maybe on Instagram if they'd like to know more?
Yeah, so Instagram, bustarat.today, and that is my website as well. And my personal is Drew_Birch. That's Drew_Birch, Birch.
Okay.
So they can find me on Instagram on those two pages.
Well, thank you again. I know you're headed probably to bed, and I'm headed off for the rest of my afternoon. Thanks for
Yeah,
being
we're going to
here.
go to bed early so we can be back up at 5, back on that routine.